fucking porty after a roast dinner, but we got to get back on with shit again. So there's quite a few little bits to this engine build which are going to take a considerable amount of time and in which I need to do a bit of preparation for. One of them is manifold, building a merge collector. So yesterday my Gizfab merge collector jig arrived. This has to be used in a bandsaw. Of course I don't have a fucking bandsaw. So I'm now going back to the unit to collect a couple of lengths of that SCH10 pipework I ordered the other day, and then I shall be cutting it at an unknown location. I say unknown location because I can't really say where I'm going to be doing it, because I shouldn't be doing it, where I'm going to be doing it. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of footage on that, but I've got to be a bit careful around recording it as well. So if there's no footage for it, just appreciate the circumstance. Also, later on this week, got to end up having to go back and getting some more argon gas, because I ran out the other day. Now, I run out at a prime opportunity, because the last thing I want to be doing is welding that manifold up and running out halfway through when I'm trying to fucking back purge. Now, Aidan, I am sorry, because I ran out right in the middle of welding a new flange on your manifold, and of course it fucking blew a hole in your manifold, which you were there to see, so we got to fill that fucker in as well.
Right, so back down the unit again. So quickly show you this. This is Aidan's Proton Jumbuck, formerly known as the Cumbuck. So usually has an Evo front end on it and stuff, because apparently it bolts on from factory. But yeah, he's doing some fucking cool stuff to this. 4-wheel drive, turbo conversion and shit like that. This was the manifold I was adapting and welding up for him. So it's had a new flange on it. We did some pie cuts for a fancy fucking external wastegate and shit like that. But anyway, enough of that. Maybe we can convince him to do his own YouTube shit. But let's go get a pipe. Alright, so there we go. A couple of lamps of SCH10. All the fucking good stuff. Probably end up making a couple of collectors at this rate. So, for no unrelated reason to, I'd like to relocate the turbo on the sedan as well, but that's a discussion for another day. So let's go. Right, so for the merge collector, we're just going to start off by cutting 4 slugs at 90mm. We've got the stop set up, so all we've got to do is hit start and then set our feed rate for the cut to do itself. Right, so that's now literally cutting away in the jig. So how we space that jig off is, when it zooms in, just with an M8 nut. So it's an M8 nut width away from the blade to get the perfect spacing. Right, so that's all 4 slugs now cut out. So the bandsaw has left a little bit of an imperfection on the bottom of the profile there, which we'll just have to hand file out so we can get the fitment nice and tight on these 4 runners for the merge collector itself. So finally got another bottle of Pure Shield argon, another 20 litres there, which we'll have to plumb in later. But we've already welded this merge collector up, so I welded it up elsewhere. Hasn't turned out too bad. Just quickly turn the camera off and we'll get it under the light properly. So end up fighting to see this properly without light, but yeah, you can see if we zoom in there, meets up quite nicely in the middle. I'd say that's not too bad for a first attempt. The only thing I will say is that spike just there in the centre, I am very tempted to just dab a bit of weld on it in case it heats up and fucking melts off and goes through my turbo. But apart from that, there's a couple of points in there. We can see a bit of blow through just there, there, and if we come round to this side, there. So ideally, I'd like to have back purged this and get it to weld itself on the inside basically, but yeah, I just could not get the fucking penetration through there, so bit of a pain in the ass. I'm hoping maybe, zoom back out, if I cut this top bit off, because I'm going to put a V-band on here, I might have better access in the middle there to just run the TIG round and make sure nothing in there is going to fly off into my turbo. So there has been a bit of a revelation when making this merge collector that something like a grinder just does not cut precise enough to make something like this. So not only that, but the runners, the components to go onto this, I'm going to need to know that these are dead straight cuts. Now in the past I've used grinder and I've been able to produce stuff like this, which it looks brilliant. But what you can't see here is when I've had to jump and bridge gaps because the cuts just are not dead straight. So I'll end up having to dab like more filler into certain areas to bridge that gap. Yeah, when you're back purging you can get away with it, but when making something like a manifold, you need those precise buttered up fittings, so that when I start putting heat into this, if it's going to shrink, if it's going to pull, it's not pulling on the gap, and it should keep itself square and true. Now the only way of being able to do something like that is by cutting with something like this. So sold a few things and went out and got myself a bandsaw. So yeah, I'm going to crack on and build that up. Alright, let's actually see what we got for our money. So yeah, it's like 400 quid for machine mark, but I'd say that don't look too bad for the money. Right, let's get it assembled. Well, that's that assembled. Hopefully we can get back on the car in a minute. But yeah, so cheap little bandsaw. I mean, you can tell this is cheap. It's one of them, it is what it is jobs. There's a reason it's £400 and not £1,000. But yeah, it'll do what I need. So, but the only thing I've had to do is just modify on the back of the spring here. Needed some more tension because it was still slamming down, and when we start getting thin wall pipe, that's not going to be ideal. So all I've done is flip this bracket around the other way. Ideally we want a gas strut or something, but again, £400 versus £1,000 bandsaw. But yeah, it'll do what I want to. I mean, out of the box it says 0 degrees on the back there, but there's no way that sits at 90 to that blade, so I'll have to get an engineer's square on that and set that all up to the blade. I'd say it's not a bad buy, to be honest. I mean, find that stalling point. Where are we? Right there. I mean, it's not fucking bad, is it? So, nice little safety in the top there. Couple of variable speeds. Come with a fine TPI blade, and obviously as it slams down, it'll hit the stop anyway. Got a nice little stop on the end there for material as well. So yeah, I'd say for what I want, for what I need it for, £400, it ain't too bad, and it will make its money back when I'm doing exhaust systems and other things like that. Enough of that fucking bandsaw, let's get back on with this. Right, so where are we at? We've got turbo, I want a gearbox mount it, that means some simple things. I need to fuck all this battery tray and everything off. I've still got boost pipes here in the way, I've still got old bloody whatever the hell that is, oil breather pipe work in the way. I've even got an air filter down the bottom there. None of that's going to remain in the same position, so we need to clear that out first. Right, so now I've stripped all this out, got the battery tray out, got the intercooler pipes out and some of the other stuff off the front there. Got the turbo roughly in place where I want it. Got the inlet manifold back on just to give me some idea of spacing, and let's just say I'm starting to understand why people run a simple relocation pipe when doing a gearbox mounted turbo from the back of the original cast manifold just over the top. Space is going to be an absolute headache. Right, so one of the first things I'm going to have to look at, so this is roughly where I want the turbo. There's a few considerations which I'll speak about in a minute, but I'm going to have to make a jig which will hold this turbo in the exact position when a cylinder head and everything else is off the car. So I've got a couple of old cylinder heads up there on the shelf. what we're essentially looking at doing is picking up a few of these bolt hole points. So we've got a lift and eye there, which will be nice and structural. There's an M6 there for the cam cap. I'm a little bit wary of picking up off that, but a couple of M8s on this vacuum pump as well. So we've got options where to pick up from and make a jig. Now, the reason I want to make a jig and why I don't want to just fly it in the car, mainly fabrication is going to be a bloody nightmare around there. Not only that though, there's going to be considerations for space and stuff like that, so I'll be able to look at this a lot better when the engine's outside of the car, but I still need to know this turbo is going to clear bodywork, bonnet and stuff like that. Right, so let's start talking about some of those considerations. So we've got the turbo oil return here. These must be gravity fed. These can have no restrictions back to the sump and must not be kinked in any way. So looking at where I've got the turbo mounted here, or roughly sat, first problem we're going to see is this gearbox mount. Now we can nibble a little bit of material out of it, but structurally we must have these bolt points and we must have these bolt points here. So how the mount actually works, there's a sub mount underneath here which holds the rubber mount itself, and that cradle bolts into the side of the chassis leg there via two M8s. Now I have seen people remove this plate thinking they're going to make a flash show car and smoothing it all in, and then what do they go and do? Those two M8s in the side of the chassis leg there rip clean out. So we know from past experience and seeing other people, we can't do that. We can nibble out of it at the most, but we have to look at the position of the turbo more than anything to make sure that oil drain sits in the right place. Now, whether or not that means that I can pick up back off the factory point down the back of the bay, or whether I have to come forward and add an additional drain into the top of the sump is another matter, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. But of course, gravity fed, that must be thought about. Right, now looking at how Sam used to have this turbo on his 306, I've already realised something, and that's that I had the orientation wrong. So he had the actuator quite high up. We know this because the oil feed is on top, which means the oil drain is perfectly down. Now that adds another complication, because that flange points downwards for the infeed of the turbo, which means we've got to pick up somewhere along here and potentially have a 90 into it. Now that's all well and good, but if you have a little look, you can see how close that actuator is going to be to the bonnet line already. So this adds another complication. Next thing is just how little room we actually have down the back here. Even I didn't realise it was as tight as this, so this is going to get interesting, especially when I thought this was a small collector, and then you start comparing it to that gap, and yeah, it looks all well and good, but we've still got to get a downpipe in there as well. There's still going to be a downpipe which has to route from here somewhere and go down the back there, back into the existing tunnel. Yeah, even I don't know where we're going to get the space from for this one. So for reference, this is what I was hoping. Coming out the turbo, it's 2.5. I was hoping to step straight into 3-inch, so there's absolutely no restrictions in that system at all. But when you start looking at it, so that's the gear linkages and stuff there, and that's quite tight. I don't know how much room I've actually got there, but when you start getting back here and you consider that link just there moves, all of a sudden I don't know how much room I've got. So the only solution is to bring it up higher, which then means I've got less room on the manifold, and of course the elephant in the room here, my heater matrix pipe, that's got to be fucked off somewhere else. So we're going to end up having to probably dive it down and then coming back up and getting that just well out of the way. Right, now we can do things like this with pie cuts and get a little bit kinky, and that will save a lot of room. But I mean, the big question to me now is, can I actually fit 3-inch down there, or do I just need to go back to the drawing board, reconsider it, and just run 2.5 all the way down? Right, so school lesson, let's literally take it back to the drawing board. So this is a typical intake gasket which has been traced out. The black, that's my intake runners. So you can see from that, you can hollow out and you can come back here, but that's going to be introducing more heat into the inlet manifold, which I just do not need in the first place. So one of my other areas of concern is basically these exhaust ports, if you look at the angle I'm going to have to come, I'm potentially going to have to come like this way. So that's because I need to avoid that bolt hole and still be able to get in there. I might be able to come outwards and then down, but that means that's going to be an absolute bastard to get on. But so let's rub that out, and we'll give that one a little bit of thought. But so how I've seen other people do these is usually put a collector down here somewhere and then come back up on themselves. I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to have the collector over here near the vacuum pump and make a nice feature of it, but I don't think I'm going to get to do that now. So basically I think I'm going to end up having to make something like this. So that pipe will come over the front, obviously, because we've got the 4 runners there. It's looking a little bit messy, but it should give you a rough idea of what I'm aiming for. So I reckon this is potentially going to be the way I end up having to go. Now, if I do get my own way, what I'll be doing, let's get rid of this. There we go. If I do get my own way, what I would love to do is fuck that off over there, all the runners out this way, over there. And then where that vacuum pump is off the board over there, would have the collector here, making a nice fucking feature of the system. Many people keep asking why I'm creating myself such a headache to try and make myself an exhaust manifold, and the reason is simple. It's because of the amount of restrictions which are in the original exhaust manifold. So let's clamber over it. We'll just have a look at one. So there you go, that's an original exhaust manifold. If you have a look, you can see that there's a good quarter of that port ellipsed off before it's even come out of the cylinder head. Now, that is because they needed the clearance from factory, these M8 bolts, and you can see just how close those gaskets get to these M8 bolts. Now, I get people say to me all the time, why don't you just port the cylinder head, blah de blah de blah. Look at that. There's not a lot of meat there in the first place between that port and that M8 bolt. Not only that, this is showing that the port itself isn't a major restriction in the link, it's the exhaust manifold. Now, if I can clear this restriction up, give myself a true sized runner all the way to the turbo, there's lots of gains to be had there. So the other reason we're not porting this build from the word go, I've set myself the mammoth task of wanting triple stock figures, so that's 270 brake horsepower. Now, this first incarnation of the build, I want to be able to leave myself some scope, some room for improvements, that when I dyno this, if it doesn't get anywhere near, I still have elements I can go back, revisit to make more power. Right, so I'm now at a bit of a stalemate with this manifold build because I'm waiting for the flanges to arrive for the turbo, so that's going to be the downpipe and then the actual in-feed mountain flange for the turbo itself. I've also had the exhaust manifold flanges redesigned because I realised I personally didn't want 2 separate banks. I've decided to have them both connected into each other so it's one flange. The reason for that is I'm a little bit scared when I go to weld these runners that we'll get a bit of warpage, and when it comes to mounting this up, we'll have one bank of runners sat forward and maybe one sat back. That will just mean when it's sliding onto the studs, it's going to be a fucking nightmare. The holes might not line up. One flange across, it's always going to meet up because those holes are going to be correct from the word get-go. Right, so unfortunately I have run out of time today. I need to get some form of video out because it's been 2 weeks, so you've seen roughly the plans, where we're going with this. Unfortunately, it has been another waffle season because I'm still waiting on parts to be able to make a start and get involved in that. I mean, we've now achieved, we've got a bandsaw, so that means when it comes to fabricating the runners and stuff, hopefully shrinkage, warpage will be kept to an absolute minimum because everything will be a tight fit and buttered up to each other. But so where do we go from here? So at the moment I'm trying my utmost hardest not to start pulling the engine apart, mainly because I'm going to be cutting and grinding right in the vicinity, and it worries me with dust, fucking carborundum, all that shit floating around. But we've got a couple of other things we need to get on with. So I've got to look at rebuilding another fuel pump. this one originally, so 11mm, it was intended from a forged engine. It's got various other bits and pieces done to it, but looking back at it, I'm not happy at the fact I used a cold start advance body. So looks like it isn't one, but I blanked it off back here. Now since then I've got 101 fucking pumps, so I've got options. Like, I've got a non-cold start one I've recently bought here. Not only that, when it comes to building the pump, because I'm going V&T, we've got to think about a throttle position sensor for reference reading for that V&T controller. Right now I do actually have a couple of these throttle position sensors kicking around, but I'm missing the rest of the setup for it. So I've actually ordered myself a donor pump, which is coming from Spain, and I'm hoping it will be here in the next few days so we can get building that pump up. Right, so I apologise, this one's taken 2 weeks to get out this time. We haven't really got a lot achieved. Work, shit like that, life goes on, you know what I mean. We're still waiting for bits and pieces to arrive, so hopefully once those exhaust manifold flanges start coming, we can start cracking on, mocking up, stuff like that. We've got the jig to make for the turbo yet. Hopefully this other pump from Spain arrives at some point, so we've got a pump build we can get on with. And yeah, I'm still trying to put that engine build off because I'm a little bit scared of all the dust and stuff floating around in the unit when I want to be building a clean engine. So, but cheers for watching, guys, it's appreciated, and I will catch you next time.